By the time you're in your 50s or 60s, you've usually been to enough family gatherings that you don't need to imagine how they'll feel. You already know. You know how long the drive will take. You know the traffic, the parking, the small irritation of carrying food or gifts inside. You know who will be there, who will dominate the conversation, and which topics will quietly drain the room. You know how long you can stay before your shoulders tighten and you start watching the clock. So when the invitation comes, you don't react right away. You pause, not because you're unsure, but because you're checking in with yourself. And sometimes the answer comes back very clearly. I don't want to do this. Not out of anger, not because of one bad memory, but because you already know the emotional cost, and you're not sure you want to pay it again. This realization usually doesn't happen when people are young. When you're younger, you still believe effort will change things. You explain yourself. You try to be more patient. You think if you show up differently, the dynamic will shift. By midlife, you've gathered enough experience to see patterns for what they are. You've shown up consistently. You've made the calls. You've gone to the birthdays, the holidays, the graduations, and the difficult gatherings that weren't convenient or enjoyable. You've been present when people needed support, often without being asked, and without expecting much in return. That part often gets overlooked. From the outside, it can look like you suddenly pulled away, like you just stopped trying. But for most people, stepping back comes after years, sometimes decades, of doing exactly what they were taught to do. Being available, being dependable, being the one who keeps things going. By this stage in life, you don't walk away lightly. You've already tried everything you know how to try. By the time people reach their 50s, 60s, and 70s, life usually looks very different than it did when these family patterns were first formed. Parents may be aging or gone. Health isn't something you take for granted anymore. Energy has limits that didn't exist before. Many people are helping adult children, caring for spouses, managing medical appointments, or simply trying to protect what strength they have left. At this stage, time feels more finite. You become more aware of how you spend it and who you spend it with. You start noticing which interactions leave you steady afterward and which ones leave you depleted for days. What once felt manageable in your 30s or 40s can feel heavy now, not because you're weaker, but because you're more honest about the cost. From the outside, others may see your absence and assume you've changed or become distant. What they don't see is that your life has filled with responsibilities that require real presence. They don't see the careful calculations you're making about where your energy goes. They don't see that stepping back isn't about avoidance, but about preserving yourself so you can show up where it actually matters. This isn't withdrawal, it's prioritization, shaped by experience. That's when you start to understand something important. Showing up doesn't always mean being connected. For many people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, family gatherings start to feel like emotional work. You're not relaxed, you're monitoring yourself. You're choosing words carefully. You're anticipating reactions. You're making sure no one gets uncomfortable, even if it means staying quiet or staying small. Nothing terrible happens, no fights, no scenes. But you leave tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. That exhaustion has a reason. Your body recognizes environments that require constant self-management. Even when everything looks fine on the surface, your nervous system stays alert. Your jaw tightens. Your breathing changes. You're not resting, you're managing. Over time, your body learns. It remembers how it feels to walk into that space. That's why you can feel drained before anything even happens. And that's also why relief often shows up the moment you leave. Eventually, a practical question starts to form. Why am I spending my limited time in places where I don't feel comfortable being myself? That question isn't bitterness, it's discernment. By this stage in life, most people have been playing the same role in their family for a very long time. Maybe you're the responsible one, the listener, the one who smooths things over, the one who doesn't bring up difficult subjects. Families tend to freeze people in time. No matter how much you've grown, they still respond to the version of you they know. The role you learned early becomes the role you keep, often without realizing it. That role may have helped everyone get along, but it often required you to adjust yourself, to hold back, to let things go that never really left. After decades of that, it can start to feel hollow. You can sit with family and still feel unseen because they're interacting with the role you play, not with who you are now. Not every family that feels this way is openly dysfunctional. Many are simply emotionally distant. Conversations stay polite and surface level. No one asks real questions. No one talks about what actually matters. Everything is fine, but nothing is close. That kind of emptiness can feel especially heavy later in life, when time feels more limited and tolerance for pretense is lower. You don't want to spend hours talking without connecting. You don't want to leave gatherings feeling like you didn't really show up as yourself. So you start declining invitations. At first, you give reasons. You're tired. You have plans. You don't feel well. Eventually, you stop explaining, because explaining doesn't change anything. Even when stepping back feels right, guilt often follows. Most people were raised with the idea that family obligations come first, that you show up no matter how you feel, that opting out is selfish. So when you don't go, you might question yourself. You might wonder if you're being too sensitive or unforgiving. That doubt is common, especially for people who've spent their lives accommodating others. But there's a distinction that becomes clearer with age. Loyalty doesn't require self-erasure. You don't owe anyone your presence if being there consistently leaves you emotionally depleted. Love that requires endurance instead of ease isn't love, it's obligation. When people skip family gatherings, they often notice something unexpected. The day itself feels calmer. There's no tension beforehand, no emotional cleanup afterward. They realize how much energy they were spending just to get through something that wasn't actually nourishing. That space often fills with something else. Maybe it's a quiet meal at home, a walk, a conversation with someone who actually listens, or simply rest without guilt. For many people, this is when the idea of family begins to change. It becomes less about blood and more about mutual respect, less about tradition and more about safety, less about obligation and more about being able to show up without editing yourself. This doesn't mean family relationships can't ever change. Sometimes they do. Sometimes distance creates clarity. Sometimes it doesn't. But one person can't fix a dynamic alone. And by this stage in life, many people recognize that trying harder isn't the answer. People who stop going to family gatherings later in life aren't rejecting connection. They're choosing a kind of connection that doesn't require them to disappear. They've learned, often through long experience, that peace is not something to feel guilty about. It's a reasonable standard, and choosing it doesn't make you cold or ungrateful. It usually means you've finally learned to listen to yourself. And for many people in their later years, that quiet honesty is what finally allows them to feel at home. Whether that home is with others or simply within themselves.